Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LEC Week 3 overview, analysis, and at the end, my final power rankings for the regular season here in the LEC. It's the final week of the, I guess, regular season, or whatever you want to call it, the round robin stage, however you want to end up nailing it down. It's the final week for that, week number 3. By the end of this episode, we will know the first 2 teams that are officially eliminated from the summer split. We will know our 8 teams and what groups they are slotted into for the group stage, and we are going to know the process that a lot of these teams and the momentum that a lot of these teams are going into the next stage with. So a lot of really exciting things. Let me know down in the comments section below what you guys thought of week number 3. What teams overperformed or underperformed your expectations? Did you expect the outcomes that ended up coming out? The 2 teams that did not make it, did you expect it to be those 2 teams? I would love to hear your thoughts down below, but let's go ahead and talk about it. Of course, on this channel, what we do is we go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team is able to generate, covering all 15 games. I'll be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game, and then at the end of the week, I will be giving my updated power rankings. I'll be going over the groups a little bit in this one, and I will also be giving a player of the week and a dud of the week. But without further ado, let's jump right into day number 1. And remember, every single game really matters now, especially with so many teams sitting at 2 and 4 going into this week. It really is life or death for pretty much everybody except for the top teams, and they really want to secure one of the top seeds. So everybody fighting for survival, and kicking off day number 1, a battle of 2 teams very much fighting for survival. We saw Astralis taking on SK Gaming, and Astralis is able to pick up the win. Really good win for Astralis here. They absolutely needed it. SK is a team that I've been pretty out on over the course of this split. They're one of the few teams that I just don't see a ton of upside in when it comes to being able to take down any of the top teams. Astralis has shown in the past that they are a pretty interesting team, but another team that I'm fairly low on. I think you can make an argument that on paper, at least for me, these are the 2 weakest teams in the LEC at the current moment. Obviously, Vitality playing a little bit different, but Astralis being able to pick up the win here is very, very big for them, and being able to do it on a rather standard comp, I think is also incredibly exciting. This is their first win of the split that isn't on Yasuo, and that's massive. That's really, really good for them as a whole, just to prove that they can do it. And Leader looking so good. He's going to get my player of the game here on the Azir. Really, him gapping Certus in the mid lane is a big reason why Astralis was able to win this. A lot of their wins in previous splits were due to, yes, Leader playing well, but Kabe and Jonghoon obviously are the big factor for this team that has kind of pushed them forward. They've been significantly less active, in my opinion, throughout this split so far. So to see Leader stepping up and really being a really good carry for this team in the mid lane in this game, it's just a good sign overall. And especially on the Azir, he knew exactly what to do. He was able to output damage very consistently. You know, the shuffles were great, even when he used them defensively towards the back half of the game. He just knew exactly where he needed to be. He piloted this champion really well, and that's really good to see. It was never that he couldn't play these champions, it's just that this team never won when he played those champions. So really good to see that they can play through him even on something that isn't super aggressive like the Aurelia or like the Yasuo. But the rest of this team was also good. 1-1-3 had a really good game on the Vi. Marcoon also did. He was definitely the best player on SK. We'll get to him in a bit, but 1-1-3 had one of his better games of the split. Kabe and Jonghoon were definitely still positive. Jonghoon in particular continuing to make a ridiculous amount of plays on the Nautilus. Love to see him moving around the map. And then Finn was good on the Renekton in that same vein. Astralis just looked very good in this game. They were the better team. They lost a little bit in the early game because Marcoon did play incredibly well on the Poppy, but they made up for it towards the back half by just kind of having better macro, but mostly just being better team fighters. And I think, you know, the player diff was a little bit of the reason that they ended up walking out of this game with a win. But for SK on the other side, unfortunate loss here, and it just goes to show that, you know, maybe I was right putting them at number 10 in my power rankings. I just don't really see a ton of upside with this team. I really do like Exakick, and I think Marcoon is a more than serviceable jungler at this level. Could be upper half on a better team, but the talent around it, I don't super believe in, and a lot of that comes into the fact that I think mid lane has regressed a ton since Winter Split. Certus is going to get my dud of the game here on the Nico, and he's gotten quite a few of these this year. It's really unfortunate. He had such a good Winter Split. It felt like we were finally starting to see the breakout that I had kind of been talking about for a while. I like Certus as a player quite a bit, but it just never, it wasn't sustainable, it seems, and he's been quite bad over the course of the rest of the year. One of the worst mid laners in the LEC, and that kind of carried over into this. There was a pretty big gap between Leader and Certus, and that was the reason why Astralis had such an easy time being able to win the mid and late game fights. And he's going to need to step up. He simply has to be better if this team wants any chance of being able to compete near the top of the standings. And at 2-5 after this loss, like, they're on the brink of being eliminated seeded in the bottom 2, and I don't think a lot of people would be all that surprised if they were a bottom 2 team. Now, obviously, SK certainly doesn't want to be that. Remember, they were top 4. They got out of groups in winter, and so this is definitely a team that I think at the very least wants to make top 8, and they're going to need to get their shit into gear. Marcoon's a good player. I think Exekit can carry games. DOS can definitely enable, but Certus has to step up. Irrelevant's fine. He's fine in the top lane. I think that there are better top laners, but there are significantly worse top laners as well. But Certus is going to have to step up. He's going to have to continue to grow back into that version of him that he was in winter, or else this team's going to struggle. And then for Astralis, really good win here. I'm still not entirely sold on this team. They're still, kind of on that brink. You're going to need more than 3 wins to guarantee your spot into the next stage, more than likely. And so for Astralis, great win here, but you're going to have to carry it over into the rest of the week. And then moving on to game number 2 here of day 1, and this was one I think we were all looking forward to seeing because of a little bit of a roster swap up. We had Team Vitality taking on Koi, and Koi is going to be able to pick up the win. Again, very important for both of these teams to be able to get wins early. Vitality in particular needs to get their shit into gear. They're going to be 1-6 moving into the final 2 days, and I already talked about how 3 wins very well could not cut it in terms of being able to get into that next round. So this is a very brutal loss for Vitality, but a very necessary win for Koi to be able to pick up here. And, there is a substitution to talk about. Bo is out. Douglas is in. Very interesting choice here for the final week of the season. Bo just never really seemed to be on the same page as the rest of Vitality, especially over the back half of the year. Things were working at the beginning when it felt like they could just outskill everybody. Bo was generating these massive early game leads in the jungle, and then just playing so aggro, it didn't really matter that he wasn't really playing with the rest of his team. But I think when teams started to catch up to them in terms of talent level, when teams' synergy started to get better and a lot of these players started to get more comfortable playing with each other, they needed to rely more on coordinated plays, and Vitality was just never very good at those. And so Douglas coming in, hopefully to kind of increase the synergy and the cohesion, but this is a kid that's basically never played at a remote level like this, and so huge opportunity for him. He was actually okay in game number 1, but for Koi, it really was all about them. I would say they were just kind of the better team. Vitality had moments in this game where a couple of players were keeping them in it, Photon and Douglas to be precise, but Koi was just better. Player of the game for me, I think could go to quite a few people. I'm going to give it to Larson in the mid lane on the LeBlanc. He was just the better mid laner in the series. He did a great job in lane of being able to generate that lead. Sometimes LeBlanc into Azir can be a little bit of an up and down matchup, but Larson made it look ridiculously easy, and then he wasn't the only player to play well. Comp was really good this game, and again, I always talk about it. When Comp plays well, Koi wins. When Comp does not play well, Koi loses. I think he was a little bit more of a product of the team in this one, but still, very good game from him. Shigenda was a really interesting player on the Gnar, built Hullbreaker, and then tried to teamfight every once in a while, but tried to keep that Hullbreaker stack on. Just some interesting stuff coming out from the Koi players. I do like what they were able to do in this one. Larson, in particular, has just been incredibly good for this team and incredibly consistent. Him and Shigenda are the saving graces for Koi, and the reason that this team is still in contention for a playoff spot. If it was just up to Malrang, Comp, and AdVN, I don't think that this team would be anywhere near top 8, but lucky for them, Larson and Shigenda are pretty darn good, and they continue to be good here. Larson in particular has just been crazy consistent over the course of this year. He really hasn't had a bad game. I know he's not exactly the biggest carry in the world, but I can't remember the last time Larson actually lost a game for Koi, and so good stuff overall from them. And then for Vitality, I do want to say something before I get into this, because Perks is going to be my dead of the game. It was pretty obvious that he ended up just getting outplayed. This was one of his, lesser performances of the split, and he's actually had quite a few of these in this split in particular, but the conversation surrounding Perks is that he just can't play anymore, and I see a lot of fallacies just being talked about online when it comes to Perks. I see this conversation about how consistently down in CS, consistently not doing damage in team fights, yada, 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 right? The stats just don't back that up, even remotely. He's first for all mid laners in damage percentage. He does the most amount of his team's damage per mid lane, per a number, I don't, you know what I mean. You know what damage percentage is if you're watching this video. He's number 1 in all mid laners in terms of damage percentage. He was number 3 in terms of CSD at 15 before this week. And then you look at every other split before this, and especially last year, he was number 1 by a large margin in CSD at 15. He's still a really good player. He's going to make some mistakes, and he's going to have bad games because he is a relatively volatile player. He was that on Cloud9, and hell, there were a lot of times where he was that on G2 as well. But to pretend like Perks is completely washed because he's having probably probably the worst split that he's had in his entire career. Like, that's just an insane thing to say, in my opinion. I am going to say that he got gapped in this game by Larssen. Larssen was significantly better, significantly more proactive, and Perkz wasn't particularly good on the Azir. Just not a lot of really good moments, wasn't dealing a lot of damage in the late game. But to pretend like this game is an epitome of what Perkz has been able to do over the course of not only this year, but the last couple of years on Vitality, it's absurd, right? Like, you just have to be completely ignoring things in order to believe that. He's been a big part of what this team wants to do, and this idea that Perkz is the reason that Vitality is losing, I think is insane. Like, yes, he's not been very good this split, but I mean, they would be able to win if they had good players and Perkz was your worst player, right? Like, they would not be 1-6 with that situation, and so Upset's also been relatively irrelevant across this entire year, a player that, kind of the opposite of Perkz, hasn't necessarily made any sort of, like, majorly bad decisions, hasn't necessarily been, like, awful in any one particular game, but also has not done anything to help this team win games, and that's always been the problem with Upset, is sometimes he can be a little bit too passive, and that's been the case. Kaiser's taken more of a backseat here. He definitely doesn't want to be the playmaker, and Douglas coming in, while he did try to make plays, is certainly not going to be expected to make a lot of crazy amount of plays. Photon continues to be this team's best player, even if he's relatively inconsistent at it, and, you know, Vitality just can't rely on that. They can't rely on just their top laner showing up. If Perkz doesn't show up in a game, it's going to be very difficult for them to win, but, you know, I still think Perkz is a good player. Again, it's a weird aside, because I know Perkz didn't play well here, but the conversation surrounding him has very much turned into he doesn't deserve a spot in the LEC, which is just absurd for anybody who watches the games. Like, it takes 2 seconds to figure out that Perkz is still better than probably, you know, most of the LEC mid laners, but for Vitality, they're really in the danger zone now. I mean, they've really got to figure out how they're going to get out of the situation that they have put themselves in, because they're basically one loss away from not being able to make it into the group stage, and so they've got to win out from this point onwards, and this was not a great indication that they can do that. And then for Koi, it's a good win. It certainly doesn't save them, but it still is a good position to be in. You really probably only need one more out of the final 2 days to get into that group stage, and if Larssen and Shigende continue to show up, I think it's going to be relatively good for them. Then moving on to game number 3 here of day 1, and it's actually a battle between two teams that look pretty good moving into the final week. We have Excel taking on G2 Esports, and I certainly wasn't expecting to say that moving in to week number 3, but G2 is going to be able to pick up the win. They are going to be able to move to 6-1 on the split. They're looking to get that number 1 seed moving into group stage, which obviously isn't the most important thing in the entire world, but it is still nice to have. It's still nice to have your pick of which first round opponent you would like to get if you get one of those top 2 seeds, and with this win, they're in basically as perfect a position as they could possibly be in to get that. They really only need one more win after this to guarantee a top 2 position and, you know, very likely a top 1 position. And so, you know, Excel on the other side looked fantastic. They went 3-0 in week number 2 after basically being bottom feeders, being the number 10 team in the entire league all year long up until that point, but they finally started to show some fire, and while it wasn't necessarily perfect in this game, they did get outplayed, and G2 did end up beating them. There still are positives to take away from this, and I certainly am not looking at Excel super negatively coming off of this game, but for G2, they just continue to look like the best team in the LEC, which I think is a good thing for a lot of LEC fans. You want this team to be able to show up internationally, and I think that they're really, you know, kind of getting their consistency down right now, and they're getting into a really nice groove that could get them very easily into those final tournaments, and so that's really good, and it's the same players that we've kind of been talking about all year. Player of the game for me is going to go to Mickey X in the support position onto the Braum. He's just so good at this champion. It's actually absurd how much better he is on Braum than any other support is, basically on any other champion. It's not even his signature. I wouldn't consider it his signature, but it very quickly might become that. Obviously, Excel making a major mistake and letting the Draven through draft, and Hansama getting that first blood certainly doesn't help, but Mickey being the one to set up basically everything that the Draven did this entire game, it made the Draven really not all that relevant. Like, he was getting a lot of the kills, he was doing a lot of the damage, but Mickey was really the one creating a lot of the opportunities, and he just continues to be by far the best support in the LEC, by far the best support in the West, and, you know, Mickey's just way back. Like, there really is nothing else to say. He is super back at this point. He is, again, one of the best players in the LEC, and certainly will be an MVP candidate when you look at the entire year up until this point, but Hansama has continued to be good as well. He's also going to be in that MVP conversation. He's been crazy consistent over the course of the year, has been basically nothing but a positive for this team in 2023, and that's really good. We were looking at these two as necessary bounce-back candidates after both had rather rough 2022s, and both of them absolutely did bounce back. We kind of all expected that. I talked about that in my preseason stuff. We all kind of knew that they were going to be a lot better here on G2, but they've been the best bot lane in the LEC, and I think it's been very fun to watch. Broken Blade was also phenomenal. He's going to continue to get negative attention just because he's Broken Blade and because G2 fans want to blame someone. And, Broken Blade has kind of been the easy target over the course of the last year, but he continues to be one of the better top laners in the LEC. Yike and Caps are still really good. Caps on LeBlanc, Yike on Trundle. Yike is more coordinated as a facilitator than I think people give him credit for, and I think he kind of showed that off in this game. Just in general, G2 feels like a very complete team, and they're very fun to watch. And then for Excel on the other side, some good and some bad. I think that there was good in terms of what Patrick and Limit were able to do, not only in the bot lane, but in terms of team fighting. They didn't get absolutely destroyed. Patrick's just a really good team fighter, and he's going to be able to keep up, even with the super strong Draven, but the rest of the map honestly just kind of lost, and there was really not a lot they could do to salvage the game. My dead of the game is going to go to Abadaga on the Nico. This Nico pick really is just not working in the West at the current moment. It's been a little bit better in the LCS, but I think that's because players are less adept at being able to beat it. I just don't think it's something that's going to work internationally. It kind of takes a lot of skill to be able to pull off at a very high level, and we've just not really seen Western teams be able to do it. That Nico Nocturne pairing in particular has been very common amongst a ton of teams, and it's really just not worked. Peach wasn't particularly good on the Nocturne in this game, and Abadaga was certainly not good on the Nico, not really setting up a ton of plays, not really creating a ton for the team, just kind of being there, right? And that's never really what you want to see. Odoamne was fine in the top lane, but certainly was significantly worse after getting counterpicked with the Olaf. Excel just kind of was behind the 8 ball on this one, and that's okay. Again, it's G2. I really am not expecting Excel to be able to go toe-to-toe with G2 in terms of, what they've shown over the course of this year. I still think that they're in a pretty decent position. Again, it's very likely only going to take at minimum 1 win for them to get into group stage, which is already such an improvement over the last few weeks, but even with this loss, they're in a position where they could end up in a pretty good, seed at the end of the week if everything goes according to plan. And then for G2, they're fighting for top 1. Like, that really is what's got to be on the mind for them at the moment, and this was a really good step in that direction. Everybody on this team is playing well, maybe with the exception of Caps. Not that he's playing bad, but, if he can get into form, if he can turn into Claps again, like, G2's going to be relatively unstoppable domestically, in my opinion. And then moving on into game number 4, it's a battle between two teams that should be near the top of the standings. We had Fnatic taking on Team BDS. And Fnatic is going to be able to get the job done. They continue to look phenomenal throughout the summer split, like one of the best teams in the entire region after really struggling throughout the beginning parts of the year. Really fun how both Fnatic and Excel have kind of, raised their stock so much after being teams that I think people really criticized for underperforming throughout the first parts of the split, or the year so far, and I think Fnatic is looking really, really good right now. They're looking like one of the best teams in the LEC, full stop, and a lot of that is just because a lot of their players have stepped up and become a lot more than I think we all kind of expected them to be, at least in 2023. Player of the game for me is going to go to Noah. I mean, the dude has been absolutely unreal. The way that he team fights is so consistent. His positioning, his micro is so phenomenal that he's just able to outpace basically everybody else that he's playing against here in the LEC. I know I was low on Noah, and clearly that's a take that has not aged well. I'm willing to own up to when I get things wrong, and clearly I was wrong about that, but I can't, I even went back and started watching some of his Zero Tenacity tape again. It's just not this, right? Like, he was a really good player on Zero Tenacity. That whole team was really good, but Noah was not, out positioning everybody and absolutely destroying them in the same way that he's doing it here on Fnatic. He has taken a major leap up with this team, and I don't know if it's just the environment. I don't know if it's getting into a better form of competition where he, really tries and tries harder, takes it a little bit more seriously, but whatever it is, he has instantly become one of the best AD carries in the LEC, and it's been crazy fun to watch. Hopefully he's going to be able to keep this up because, I mean, this is best ADC in the league by a long shot kind of play that we've been getting from Noah throughout this split so far. Trimby continues to be super positive. It's really fun to watch his facial reactions. He feels like a spiritual successor to Bwipo in that kind of extent for Fnatic. A really fun player to watch in terms of the game, but clearly his shot calling expertise and his ability to play out the mid to late game has really helped this team close out games, which is something they really struggled with last split. Humanoid has gotten a ton better. Razork was phenomenal on the Viego, especially in the early game. He was the one that was really keeping things afloat for Fnatic early on, and then Oscar was okay. Couple of bad plays here and there. We'll talk about the 3v1 onto Adam. I guess we don't have to go super into it, but, Fnatic tried to make a play onto the Olaf and all just died 3v1. It's going to happen sometimes with an Olaf, and especially with Adam on it, who can just pilot it at such a high level, and, you can criticize the team for that a little bit, but overall, Fnatic, outside of that one play, was pretty much perfect throughout this entire game, and you just want to give them a lot of credit for that. And then for BDS on the other side, what happened to this team? Because it just feels like the player talent has completely fallen off. We were talking about Crownie and Labrov as the most consistent bot lane in the LEC through the first 2 splits. Crownie was the best AD carry, in my opinion, before before this split, and he's just been completely irrelevant. I've never seen an Aphelios do so little in a team fight. Like, he was not stepping up, he was not playing aggressive. It really does feel like it's a confidence thing for him. But the Crownie that we're getting now is much more similar to the Crownie that we were getting last time we saw him in the LEC on Vitality, where he just didn't trust his teammates, he wasn't stepping up, he was playing significantly too passive. We know he can be one of the better AD carries in the entire league, but he's just not performing like it right now. And then the top side of the map has been a problem. We've talked about Sheo and Nuke being significantly poor as the jungle mid duo, the worst part of the team in my opinion, and that continued in this game. Sheo's gonna get my dud of the game here on the Poppy. He's just lost the ability to generate pressure in the early game, and that's a major issue for this BDS team. He was so good in Spring Split that I'm just so shocked to see him take such a massive regression. Nuke, I kind of expected it from. I really was never all that high on Nuke. I thought we had enough tape of him at the LEC level to know that, you know, if he was going to be one of the players that you were relying on to win you games, you probably weren't going to win a lot of games. And so to see the rest of this team struggle, you know, for Nuke to fall down as well, I'm just not particularly surprised. But Sheo, being as poor as he has been across this split, has certainly been a shock to me. Adam was definitely the positive for BDS, as he has been throughout most of this split, and I think he's generally been the most consistent player, which is crazy to say on BDS throughout this split, and I think the Olaf was obviously really fun. A couple of moments where he was targeted pretty early in team fights and went down a lot earlier than maybe he should have, but there's really not a lot you can do on the Olaf for that. You just gotta hope that your Aphelios Azir combo can actually deal damage after you're dead, and unfortunately that just wasn't the case in this game. And so for BDS, they're kind of a low-tier team at the current moment. They're just not playing all that well. I know it's Fnatic, who is very good, but BDS is really gonna have to step up over the second half of the week for me to feel anything other than just like meh about this team going into the group stage, if they even make it there at all. And then for Fnatic, really good win here. They've obviously confirmed group stage last week, going 5-1, but moving to 6-1 here, they're very much still in play for the #1 seed coming out of the regular season. And if you would have told basically any Fnatic fan that at the beginning of the split, they would have been over the moon. And then we get to move into our fifth and final game of day #1, and it's a battle between two 4-2 teams, as we saw Mad Lions taking on Team Heretics. And Heretics are going to be able to pick up a very big win for themselves here. Mad kind of been on a little bit of a skid as of recent, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go through this video. But Heretics looking really good in this one, and it was pretty much everybody on the team, and especially the players that I think you wanted to see step up the most, the players that haven't exactly been the big carries for them over the course of this year so far. And so really, really excited for Heretics. They have a very tough schedule this week. They play arguably the 3 best teams in the LEC, which is never a good challenge, but at the end of the day, being able to pick up a win here is a very big start. And so let's give player of the game out, and for me, it was actually a very difficult choice. There were 3 members of this team that I heavily considered, but I ended up giving it to Yankos in the jungle. And again, if you want to give it to VTO on the LeBlanc, more power to you. Hell, if you want to give it to Evie on the Poppy, more power to you. All 3 were incredibly valuable in this game in terms of what Heretics were doing, just in their unique, different ways. Yankos was the primary engage and was definitely the one that was creating a lot of the action for the rest of the team, but you still need somebody to be able to follow up in terms of damage on that action, and that's what VTO was for this team on the LeBlanc, really being able to do a whole ton. And so either of those two can kind of be your player of the game, especially because both of their score lines look incredibly good. But a scoreline that doesn't look incredibly good is Evie's in the top lane. You might look at this and be like, oh, another game where Evie kind of struggled, another game where he was taking a lot of damage and didn't necessarily do a whole ton, but his presence on the map was actually incredibly valuable for Heretics because Mad was full engaging basically every single time they had the opportunity, and the Poppy made it significantly more difficult. She ate up every bit of CC, she ate up every bit of damage, she would still get a lot of clutch ultimates off, most notably the one towards the back half of the game onto Karzi that allowed Yankos to steal the Baron. And so really, really big stuff there from Evie. He was honestly just generally very good in this game, and the top side of the map was generally very good for Heretics in this game, and I think that's going to be an incredibly exciting thing moving forward for them. If Yankos can continue to step up and be one of the best junglers in the LEC, like he's been the entire year, like he's been for his entire career, we know who Yankos is. We're not surprised that he was really good on the Wukong and that he played really well into this. But if VTO can get back into that form where he was an MVP, you know, just what, last year, I believe, 2 years ago now, somewhere around there, there. It's kind of insane that, you know, he was an MVP just a little bit ago, and now we're talking about him as somebody who needs to really bounce back. But if he can get into that form again and be one of the best mid laners in the LEC, Heretics is going to be legit, and that's really kind of what's going to make or break this team's chances at being like top 2, top 3 instead of just a top 4. Evie looked pretty good in this game. Who knows if that's going to be able to be sustainable. He's not been particularly consistent over the course of this year, but he has had good games in the past. And then Flacken and Mursa were kind of taking a back seat, and that's why I was really excited, because Flacken has really been the damage carry that Heretics has really wanted to play throughout this split up until this point. You know, he's made a very good case to be in that MVP conversation, and he's basically been everything that this team could ask for and more. But him being able to take a step back on Aphelios and allow LeBlanc and Wukong to be the primaries for this team and him just be solid in the bot lane was really, really big for Heretics. Mursa was good on the Yuumi as well, as good as you can be on the Yuumi. They just looked really good and really complete as a team, so you got to be excited for that. And then for Mad on the other side of the map, just frustration. This team is starting to lose some of the luster that it was able to generate over the past couple of months. However, I do want to point out, this certainly isn't the first split where Mad Lions has struggled in the regular season. In fact, it's happened in all 3, and in all, or I guess all 3 now, but in both of the previous 2, they made finals. And so I'm not going to overreact and say that this team isn't going to be able to step up their game in best of 3s, in best of 5s, because we know that they're going to be able to do that at least a little bit. But the form is certainly concerning right now. They're not the hottest team in the entire league, and that is definitely just a fact at the moment, unfortunately. My dud of the game in this one is going to go to Niski in the mid lane. He's taken some major steps back in the regular season for me. He used to be a very good regular season player, and even in winter in particular, he was very good in the regular season. Obviously, last year he was MVP for a reason, and I think you could definitely make the case that he was the MVP of the winter split as well. I didn't. I thought Photon was a little bit more complete as a player, but Niski was definitely in that conversation for me. But spring was a little bit worse. Wasn't exactly a bad split, just a little bit more of a down split. And then the back half here of summer has just been some of his worst league that he's played in quite a long time. Certainly something to keep in mind. I don't exactly think it's going to be a pattern that continues into the playoffs, because he's always been someone who has stepped up his performances when the games matter more. But just worth noting, he's not exactly in the best of form right now. Elyoya just got outplayed by Yankos on Rek'Sai. That's going to happen sometimes. I'm not going to blame him for missing that smite towards the back half of the game. He was relying on Karzi to pull out his E in order to do that. And then Chasey got outplayed by Evie, especially with the CC towards the back half of the game. He really couldn't land any of it on anybody other than the Poppy, which was always unfortunate. Karzi and Hilly were fine. Karzi's actually probably been this team's best player in the regular season, which is really good for Mad fans, because you want to see Karzi stepping up, but it's kind of in the negative way of, I think the other players have kind of underperformed, especially in the recent, weeks. And so for Mad, you're just kind of hoping this team can eventually get into that form. You're really hoping that, this best of 3, best of 5 team that's kind of generated that mentality and generated that reputation so far this year can continue to do that throughout the rest of this split, because at least in best of 1s, they're not exactly looking as dominant as maybe you would hope. They're not looking like a top 2 or 3 team, which they really should be. And then for Heretics on the other side, this team is good. I don't know how good, but they're good enough. They're good enough to be able to win games, and that's all that really matters. I don't know if this is a top 2, top 3 team. This is probably a top 4 team, especially with a lot of the inconsistency coming from the middle of the pack in the LEC right now. But for Heretics, it's going to be interesting to see what happens the rest of this week when they continue to get tested. And now we get to move on to day number 2, the middle day here. And again, so many things at stake here. We could be seeing our first potential elimination should things go right today. But we're going to kick it off with a battle between 2, 3, and 4 teams. Excel taking on Astralis. And Excel is going to be able to pick up the win here, and they continue to look actually really good and definitely better than the bottom teams in the league, which I just don't think a lot of people were expecting moving into this final split. A lot of people saw this as like a lateral move to go and get Peach or to go and switch to Abadaga in the mid lane, especially with VTO, being such a high variance player and someone who can perform at a very high level, as we're seeing with him on Heretics right now. There really wasn't a lot of hope that Excel was going to be able to turn it around, me included, who really likes this roster and likes this team, but they've been able to do it. They're actually very competitive now towards the back half of this summer split. Astralis, one of those teams that just may not have the talent to push them across the finish line, and Excel definitely taking advantage of that here. So let's go ahead and go over it. My player of the game is going to go to Patrick in the bot lane. Really fun stuff coming out from him on the Aphelios. He's always going to be a player that is going to continue to look good when the circumstance around him allows him to. Again, he's not the most aggressive player in the world. He doesn't create the most for himself or for the rest of his team, but if he he's given resources, if he's given opportunities, he can capitalize on those resources just as good as almost anybody else in the league. That's what Patrick is very good at. Great team fighter, very consistent, and he's showing that now with, you know, Peach playing things like the Amumu and Abadaga being more aggressive in the mid lane, allowing those opportunities to kind of create itself across the map so that Patrick can just farm up and be this big team fight presence towards the back half of the game, I think has really helped this Excel team find an identity to be able to win with very consistently. So Patrick playing well is great. Limit playing the Milio at a very high level is also very good for this team. Limit was a big question mark for me coming into this roster because really he's never shown all that much at the LEC level. He's been fine as a support for both Schalke and for BDS, but he's never really been a star. So to see him, you know, come in here and replace someone in Targamas that I think does have upside, even if he really hasn't been all that good at the LEC level, at least outside of that G2 year, I think was definitely a question mark, but he played really well in this game on the Milio, and it looks like him and Patrick are finally starting to develop some level of chemistry, and most of that is just playing weak side in the bot lane, which I think really helps this team out a lot. Abadaga has a pretty interesting scoreline, but man, he got blasted in laning phase. It doesn't necessarily tell the story of the fact that Leader was just simply better early on. Now, Leader certainly made some mistakes towards the back half of the game, but Abadaga, I think, was definitely a little bit more contentious than maybe his scoreline would indicate. He still continues to be a little bit more up and down than I think this team would like. If he becomes a little bit more consistent, can maybe be, you know, kind of a piece that they can play around a little bit easier, then I think this team is going to be a lot better than what they're currently at. But Odo's very good in the top lane. Peach has been solid in the jungle. Not necessarily a superstar in that position, but still very solid, and definitely has gotten the hang of the early game shot calling down. I don't know if that's him doing it or if it's him just adapting to somebody else's calls, but this team's early game has gotten significantly better. They're now proactive, and I think that's a good thing overall. Excel's just good. Like, they're a solid team. I don't know if they're great, but they're certainly good, and that's definitely an upgrade over what they've been across this year so far. And then for Astralis on the other side, just kind of an unfortunate circumstance. We know that they like their specific drafts, but Excel knew that too, and so they ended up drafting a comp and said, like, if you're going to pick the things that you like to play, then we're going to be able to punish you for it. And Astralis did go to the comps that they like to play. Now, obviously, I'm pretty pro playing the things that you're good at, not necessarily the things that are super meta. But if the enemy team is just being like, if you pick it, you're going to lose, maybe transition to something else. The R5 Pike wasn't exactly what you really wanted to see here. Jonghoon's actually going to get my dud of the game here because the Pike was essentially invisible. There really was nothing that he did. He was W'd the entire game, I imagine. Obviously, jokes aside, Jonghoon was just not really all that relevant, especially after level 1. The Pike, who's he actually going to get on? You have Emilio on this team. You're never going to be able to get on the Aphelios. You're never going to get on the Amumu, and even if you do, it's not going to matter. You're never going to get on the Tristana. So, what exactly is your target this game? I don't really know. It was certainly an interesting pick. We know that Jonghoon is super good on the Pike. It's his signature pick, but this might have not been the game for it. Kabe wasn't exactly great on the Xayah, but like I said, the Pike was entirely useless, and so it's kind of difficult to play Xayah without a support. It can be a pretty difficult situation. Leader won lane, but kind of ran it down towards the back half of the game. Really poor team fighting coming in from him on the Silas, a pick that he's been good and bad on in the past, and so unfortunately rolled low. And then 113 and Finn were essentially irrelevant. Finn had a couple of bad Renekton engages. 113 definitely lost control of the jungle pretty early on to the Amumu and never really was able to get it back. Overall, Astralis just felt like a bottom tier team in this game, and that's kind of my worry with them, is that, you know, stylistically and talent-wise, they're really not all that good. They have a very specific style that they like to play, and when other teams counter that style or when they're pushed off of that style, they just don't look nearly as cohesive and nearly as consistent, and that's going to be a problem moving into the rest of the split. So going to be interesting to see what happens with Astralis, but nice win for Excel. They're going to move to 4-4, and I think that does secure them a spot in the group stage for the first time in 2023, so congratulations to this team. They've made incredibly big upgrades, and hopefully they can actually go out at the end of spring split here and end the regular season with a winning record. Then moving on to game number 2 here on day number 2, and it's a pretty interesting matchup, a rematch of the 2022 Summer Finals. We had G2 Esports taking on Koi, and G2 is going to be able to pick up the win. They have dominated Koi all year long, kind of showing that maybe the finals last year, the story has turned just a tad bit. G2 continues to look like the best team in the LEC, and honestly, they're in really good form right now, which should be incredibly scary for the rest of the league. Usually G2 kind of slumps going into playoffs and then just turns it on, figures it out, and looks really good, but now they're looking really good going into playoffs, which is probably even more concerning if you're a G2 fan. But overall, really good stuff from them. Player of the game was actually actually pretty difficult. Two players very much deserved it here. I think a lot of people are going to give it to Yikes. 7-1-1 on the Kazakhs is definitely a standout scoreline, but I'm going to give it to Mickey X. Man, you got to stop letting him have Braum. At this point, you can't let him have it. You got to ban out the Braum. I know it's not something you want to do. I know nobody wants to ban Braum because no one's really scared of Braum, but you got to be scared of Braum versus G2. It just kind of is the case at this point. They've clearly shown that Kog'Maw Braum is their answer to Aphelios in basically any matchup, and I think that that's really, really intriguing. It's very much worked for them so far. I don't know if that's something that's going to work for them at a higher level of competition, but certainly an intriguing bot lane to kind of give a shot here, and I think Mickey in general is a big reason why it's working. As good as Hans is on the Kog'Maw, he's very good at spacing, he's very good at getting his damage out. Mickey needs to be there to set him up for a lot of these plays, and he's just so freaking good at it. He's like very much like one of the best players in the LEC. It's not even really up for debate anymore. He's been fantastic over the course of this entire year, and that definitely continued in this game. Hans continues to look really good on the Cog, but like I said, Yike was still very good in this one. They played the Nico, but instead of playing the Nico Nocturne, the Nocturne was banned out, and so they played the Kazakhs instead. Another duo that can blow up a backline as long as the Kazakhs is in a relatively decent position to get in on a flank or something like that, and I think they still executed it very well. Caps playing more for the burst style and more for damage this game than the usual setup potential that he kind of offers the jungle, and I think that works better for him. He's looked a lot better in recent weeks. Broken Blade continues to be more than solid on the top side. Everything's just kind of rolling for G2 right now, and they look like the best team in the LEC. There really isn't a ton else that I can say. Everybody's looking good. Everybody's looking like a top player in their role at the moment, and that's very, very scary. And then for Koi on the other side, couple of good things, couple of bad things. Good things, I think Malrang had a relatively decent early game, which is just super important for Koi. That's it for the good things. Everything else was kind of bad. This was a little bit of a stomp. Really not a lot of positives, especially after like the 10 to 12 minute mark for Koi, where they just got completely outscaled. Larson got obliterated in laning phase. Shigenda really had no impact on the game, and then my dud of the game is going to go to Comp in the bot lane on this Aphelios. He's just been very bad in the lane phase throughout this entire split, and man, that's incredibly unfortunate for this team. Obviously, we can talk about how it's not like, you know, losing Trimby has changed that. He wasn't very good in the laning phase in spring either, but it's certainly not something that I think is helping the problem, and Comp's inconsistencies are a big reason why I just don't think this Koi team is very good at the current moment, and I think that's very scary if you are a Koi fan. You really rely a lot on your solo laners in terms of being able to pick up wins, or at least in your current form, you do, and Larson's been relatively consistent, but going up against a player like Caps, who does look rather reinvigorated, he just isn't very good right now. Like, it's not the same. You know, Larson playing against Nuke is going to be different than Larson playing against Caps, and we've kind of seen that. And Shigenda's a good player, but you can't do everything through top lane. It's definitely kind of been the case over the past few months that you need more than just a good top laner to be able to win games at this level. And Malrang's been very inconsistent. He had a relatively okay game here, but again, fell completely off on the Jarvan after that early game. And then Comp and AdVN were really bad in the laning phase, and so there really wasn't a lot that Koi could actually do to be able to keep up, and it very much just feels like a team and a player diff on this one. Hopefully they can figure things out, but right now, I think that number 7 ranking is looking relatively accurate. This does not feel like a team that is going to threaten to get out of the group stage. Right now, they're in danger of being able to miss out on it if they don't win over the back couple days. Of course, you want to get to that magic number of 4 that's likely going to keep you safe, and they're going to need to win on that final day to be able to push them across that finish line. And so for Koi, you better figure things out fast because the season is almost over. And then for G2 on the other side, they're just awesome. There really isn't much else that I can say about them. They're a very good team. They've clearly shown the style of game that they want to play, and they've shown that they can execute on it at a very high level. And then moving on to game number 3 here on day number 2, and it's a battle between two teams that are very high up in the standings. We had Team Heretics taking on Fnatic, and Fnatic is going to be able to pick up the win. They moved to 7-1, tied with G2 for first place, moving into the final day of the split of the regular season, and man, I mean, come on, Fnatic, you're just so good right now. They're so consistent, and they're so good at multiple parts of the game that it's actually astounding. Now, this team isn't perfect. They are going to make some mistakes over the course of a game, but for the most part, 90% of all of the games that they play are incredibly solid from them and are easy wins, and it's very, very exciting to say that because Fnatic is one of those teams and one of those rosters that we all kind of were just hoping were going to click over the course of this year. I was low on them going into the year. They ultimately proved me right for that, and then then obviously now this big bounce back with Noah and Razork playing really well and bringing Trimby in. It's a really good thing to see, and I think obviously when Fnatic is good, the LEC is more fun to watch. It just kind of is what it is there, but player of the game for me is again going to go to Noah in the bot lane, who just continues to be a huge positive force for this team. He's legitimately unstoppable in a lot of these fights. Heretics had to give up literally everything in order to kill him in that final fight, and even then it's only his second death of the LEC. Like, it's actually ridiculous what he's been doing over the course of his first 8 games. He's died twice in his first 8 games. Like, take that into account. It's actually crazy. He's been so good for this team, so consistent. He's a really good early laner, but it's his late game positioning and team fighting that really is what separates him from every other LEC AD carry and makes him basically unstoppable to deal with at that part of the game. Fnatic is more than capable of being able to get to that point. Usually, sometimes their mid games are a little bit rough. That's the part of the game that they struggle in the most for sure, but their early games are very good, and I think Noah being able to get to that part so consistently really helps this team a lot. I think playing with Trimby obviously is something that is going to help him a lot. In that same vein, Trimby is just a very, very good support and has clearly bounced back from whatever rough split he was having in the spring. He was really, really bad in the spring split, and I don't really know what was causing that, but getting off of Koi, getting into this Fnatic team, and getting a very good AD carry in Noah has definitely helped him kind of regain that form as being one of the best supports in the LEC. Razork has been phenomenal, one of the better junglers in the LEC this split by a large margin. Humanoid's been better, still relatively inconsistent, especially early on in lane phase, but has been a monster in team fights, which is super duper good for this team. And then Oscar's also been really good. He can win in lane, he can win out of lane. Fnatic just kind of wins everywhere on the map at the current moment, and I think that's a really impressive thing to say for Fnatic. And then for Heretics on the other side, this team definitely has positives. VTO played his heart out in this one. He was so good on the LeBlanc. He almost single-handedly kept Heretics in this game, which is super good to see from VTO. He did this countless amounts of times against Fnatic in particular on Misfits for so many years. And so to see him continue to do it on Heretics, kind of the spiritual successor to Misfits here in the LEC, is obviously really fun, but the rest of this team just wasn't there to be able to back him up. It was basically a 1v9 for him that he couldn't actually get done. My dud of the game is going to go to Evie in the top lane. I think you could very realistically give this to Flakked at the AD carry position as well, but Evie I think was a little bit more noticeable in terms of being irrelevant. He got his signature champion this year in the Cassante, something that he's pulled out very consistently and has really helped Heretics stabilize that top side, but he was still weak to the Olaf. Again, people aren't going to be banning out this Olaf clearly against Fnatic, which I do think is a mistake. Clearly, Oscar can play it, and it's very good into the Cassante, and so Evie kind of getting punished for that. Jankos wasn't great on the Vi, lost pressure early to Razork, and never really was able to recover. It's going to happen every once in a while, but it is worth noting one of the first times this split that Jankos was legitimately out-jungled, in my opinion. And then Flakked built Lethality Varus in 2023. Like, what are we doing? Where's the AP? You need to build AP if you're going to be playing this champion, or else he's just going to be turbo useless. He was dealing literally 0 damage, I mean, throughout the entirety of this game. Just incredibly useless stuff coming in from Flakked. Very disappointing to see him not have a good performance. He's been so good over the beginning part of this split, and through the first 2 days of the final week, it's been a little bit less than that, and so definitely not a great thing. Mersa was just whatever, honestly. He was kind of fine on the Blitzcrank. Him and VTO, in my opinion, were the most complete players on the team, but it really was a VTO 1v9 trying his best to carry this team across the finish line. But for Heretics, it's still okay. Losing to Fnatic isn't the worst thing in the world, but we knew this week was going to be tough for them. They already took down Mad Lions, and they lost to Fnatic. They've got G2 coming up on the final day, so a lot of rough stuff coming up for Heretics, but I think they're doing the best they can with what they were drawn. And then for Fnatic on the other side, this bot lane looks very legit. Noah having 2 deaths throughout the entirety of the LEC split up until this point is actually ridiculous, and everything else is falling into place too. Razork is playing phenomenal. Trimby is playing phenomenal. Oscar Rinnan's been great. And if Humanoid's like your weak link, your weakest player, that's pretty massive, especially because he's really not in bad form right now. He's just more of a team fight-oriented threat than a lane-oriented threat at the moment, which is good for Fnatic. Overall, this team looks very, very dangerous, and they're going to have a real shot of walking out of that final day and the final week as the #1 seed in the LEC. And then moving on to our 4th game of day number 2 here, and we could potentially be seeing our first elimination from the summer split, and we might have seen it here as we saw Team BDS taking on Team Vitality, and BDS is going to be picking up the win, and that means Vitality drops to 1-7 on the split, and that officially eliminates them from the 2023 summer split. They cannot make group stage. They are going to be bottom 2, confirmed at this point. At best, they can have 2 wins, and that will not put them anywhere but bottom 2, which is hilarious. I mean, it is just insane how much this Vitality team has collapsed. Remember, you know, for as much shit as we give them for not being able to perform up to the expectations throughout this year. They finished 3rd last split. They were top 3 in the LEC last split. They were 1 series away from an LEC final, but they weren't able to get over Mad Lions, and so we all thought that they were just going to come back and, figure things out a little bit better, maybe get communication a little bit better as we moved into the summer split, but things have completely fallen off the rails. Poor Douglas has come in and been fine for this team, and everybody else has kind of been the problem, which has got to be incredibly disappointing if you're a Vitality fan, but for BDS, congratulations on the win. You desperately needed it in order to keep your season's hopes alive, really. We talked about it. 2 wins is not going to cut it, so them getting that 3rd win here, it still doesn't save them. They still don't want to be in a spot where they're coming out of the final day with 3 wins. That's likely going to put them into a tiebreaker with some other group of teams, but at the very least, it sets them up into a position where they could potentially win tomorrow and move themselves forward into that group stage. But how apropos is it that player of the game in this one is going to go to Adam? This game really was, I know we haven't really talked about the game, we've more so just kind of talked about the circumstances surrounding the game, but this was both teams trying to lose over and over again. Neither team looking particularly good in this one. In my opinion, Vitality definitely had opportunities for them to be able to win. Upset in particular had a ridiculous amount of gold and was in a pretty good position on this Aphelios to try and actually win the game, but an errant flash towards the back half of the game puts him in a really bad position. Adam with the massive set ultimate towards the back half of the game that just crushed Vitality's hopes and dreams, and BDS are able to win off of that, but it's not like BDS played perfectly. Adam is going to get my player of the game because, again, that final engage, that final set ultimate is really what won them the game and really what kind of kept their season alive, if you will, but there were a lot of mistakes that kind of led up to that. He certainly wasn't playing a perfect game up until that point, but in my opinion, he was definitely the better top laner in this game, and he continues to be the one that makes the big plays down the stretch for BDS that end up pushing them across the finish line in a lot of circumstances like this. And so you've got to give him a lot of credit for that. Just very apropos, like I said, of Adam to be able to knock Upset out of the top 8, and very unfortunate for Upset. Obviously, that drama is long gone, but I assume the rivalry definitely lives on in both players' minds, and so very interesting to see there. The rest of this team was okay. Crownie certainly had moments where he looked okay on the Varus. Nuke was dealing a consistent amount of damage, I would say, on the Azir. He was probably the other main damage dealer in this game. Shea was fine, not really aggressive enough for me on the Sejuani, and Labrov certainly had some good plays as well, but again, BDS certainly could have been a little bit more clean and a little bit better in this game, but lucky for them, they were able to get bailed out towards the back half. And then for Vitality, with your season not ending here because you still have one more game to play on the final day, but with you officially being knocked out of playoffs here and really just kind of hoping that things end up working in a way where you can get to that, championship qualifier, that regional qualifier for Worlds, this is really not the performance you wanted to see. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Photon in the top lane on the Renekton. Just a poor game. Really didn't get anything done on that champion in the early game and then just scaled up into the late game to be completely useless. There were a lot of players in this game that really weren't all that relevant, but Photon to me was chief among them, and I think that that was a pretty big problem. The other player that you got to point out is Upset. That flash towards the back half of the game, if he just doesn't make that play, they probably win the game, and that's got to be really unfortunate. Perks, actually had a pretty good one on the Tristana, was dealing a good amount of damage, very similar to Nuke. On the other side of the map was relatively consistent for the team, but Vitality just couldn't hang on. They had opportunities, and unfortunately, they just weren't able to get it done. This team is now officially, like I said, eliminated, but they still have the chance to go to Worlds, which is crazy because of the amount of championship points that they've been able to accumulate over the course of the year up until this point. Should the, final group stage and the final top 4 end up working out in a certain way, there is definitely still a way where they end up getting into that championship qualifier tournament. Now, they're certainly not in the best form that they've ever been in, but it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening if they do end up making it. But for now, they're going to have to take their place at the bottom of the standings. This team reminds me so much of that Origin team from, 2019, 2020? One of those 2 years. Maybe it was 2021. One of those teams, that Origin team that was a super team that very much underperformed. It even has Upset on it just the same. And so for Vitality, hopefully you can figure stuff out and just kind of hope and pray that you get an opportunity later this year. And then for BDS, this keeps your split alive. Like I said, you're going to want to win another game on the next day, but at the very least, this puts you in a good position to control your own destiny, and that's all that you can really ask for from this team at this point. And then moving on to our 5th and final game here of day number 2, and it's a little bit of an upset as we saw SK Gaming taking on Mad Lions, and Mad continues their free fall here as SK is able to pick up the win and get to their very, very important 3rd win of the split. This puts them at the very least in an interesting position. We talk about that magic number being 4 in terms of the LEC. If you hit those 4 wins, you're moving on to the group stage, and so for SK to be able to move into the final day and be only 1 one win away, it at the very least puts control in your hands in terms of whether or not you're going to be able to make the group stage, which is kind of the goal of basically every single team, is to have it at the very least in their hands as they move into the final day. But Mad Lions, man, what happened to this team? They started 4-0, and ever since then, they've been 0-4. Certainly not, I think, what a lot of people expected for them, but we'll talk about them in a second. Let's talk about SK picking up a very important win here. Player of the game, it's gonna go to Certus in the mid lane. A phenomenal Sylas performance, and I know we talk about the LeBlanc kind of being his signature pick, but he really hasn't performed as well on it in the LEC as he did in the ERLs, and I think Sylas in particular has been the champion that a lot of people, me included, have looked at as the thing that he's been the most successful on in the LEC, and he continues to be very good at it in this game here. Nisqy just completely collapsed in this game, and he's really not been good over the past 4 games in particular, and I think Certus has been, kind of up and down, and so to see him just kind of dominate this matchup and be as good as he was for SK, it's just incredibly impressive stuff. He wasn't the only player on the team to be playing well, but he certainly was the one that was the most noticeable in my eyes. Marcoon was also really fantastic on the Poppy, and when that jungle mid duo is stepping up and being more of a positive, SK is actually in a really good spot. I trust this bot lane a lot, especially when this team has pressure and are able to actually do something with them, and so when Certus and Marcoon are able to step up and be relatively big positive forces for the team overall, SK is just generally going to be in a good position. And you can look at the scorelines. DOS has a great scoreline, Xkick has a great scoreline, but this really was a topside game for SK. It really was a topside gap for SK. Certus playing great, Marcoon playing great, and Irrelevant being really good on the Gragas as well. He's a great team fighter. He's always been a great team fighter. Just a very stable, consistent player. When the team is playing well, he's going to look good. When the team is playing bad, he's going to be irrelevant. Like, that's just kind of how it is when you are a top laner that isn't necessarily going to try and play these big counter pick matchups and take over the game. Like, he's not Adam, right? He's not Photon. He's not these players that are going to skill check you at every opportunity. He's going to play with his team, and he's going to be a positive for them. He's a very good piece for a team, but he's not really been brought up all that much this year because SK hasn't had a lot of pieces worth kind of pushing forward like Irrelevant needs to do. And so, I like him as a player, but, he's a little bit team dependent, and lucky for him, his mid jungle in this game was really strong. That's not to say Xkick and DOS were bad. They still were pretty darn good. It was just that SK definitely was a little bit more focused on topside in this game, and I think in general that was a positive for them. And then for Mad Lions on the other side, again, complete freefall mode for this team right now. About as disastrous of an ending to this split as you could ask for. They got pummeled in this game. Like, nobody played well. They got utterly destroyed. I mean, Carzzy had some moments on the Draven where he looked good. He eventually got like a 1.5k gold cash out, something actually insane, and that's obviously really, really big for this team. However, they needed more than just the Draven. They needed damage somewhere else, or they needed setup. They needed frontline, and really they didn't get it anywhere. Nisqy got absolutely blasted in lane. He's going to get done of the game again here. He's been really miserable on this 0-4 stretch. He's easily been the worst player on Mad Lions, in my opinion, and that's really scary. You're really going to need him to step up. Chasey's been very bad in the regular season. Not that that's entirely surprising. Let's cast our minds back. Yes, he's been phenomenal in best of 3s and best of 5s, and that's the case, but he's really never been good in the regular season for Mad Lions. He's pretty consistently been the weak link of the team in best of 1s. Very weird situation that he finds himself in because he's been so good in the best of 5s and in the best of 3s, but, that's something that I can at the very least excuse because of his ability to step up, but Nisqy playing bad. Elyoya not necessarily looking all that good, even on picks like the Sejuani is very concerning. There are a lot of things that I think get your mind turning about worries for this team, and I think they're all justified. Hylissang was kind of trying to create with the Blitzcrank, especially trying to set up for the Draven. However, a lot of those hooks were just very mistimed and very poorly positioned. There are a lot of things that Hylissang could have done better. Really, Mad Lions as a unit was just outplayed a lot in this game, and that's very concerning. Again, hopefully this team can kind of follow the pattern that they themselves have set up for themselves in the fact that they've gotten better as they've gotten into the best of 3s and best of 5s as, the splits have gone on, but really, they're in about the worst form they've been in all year long right now, including that awful regular season they had in spring, and I think it's really going to concern a lot of people. And then for SK, very big win. I still don't know how much I believe in this team because, again, I just think there's a little bit of a talent gap between them and some of the other teams, but Marcoon, Xkick, DOS are really good. Irrelevant, they're really good players. If Certus can step up and be a big positive in the mid lane like he was in this game, like I said earlier, this team can still win a lot. We showed it in Winter. They were a top 4 team in Winter. If they can get back to that form, they're going to be fine. It's just all about getting back to that form and not falling into some of the traps that they've fallen into over the course of the year. And then moving on to our final day of action here, not only in week 3 of the LEC, but in the LEC regular season. And we kicked off our final day with a matchup between Team Vitality and Excel. Quite apropos that these two teams are also facing off against each other here. Excel is going to be picking up the victory this time, though. If you remember back to Winter, if you cast your minds back to the first LEC split, this was the final game of the split in Winter, and Vitality was the best team in the league, and Excel was 1-7. And there was no hope, and Excel put up a really nice fight, but they weren't able to get things done. Now the tables have turned, and Excel is going to be walking away with the win of their own. So good stuff in general coming in from them, and it really was everybody on the team, as it continued to be over the course of this entire split. Player of the game for me is going to go to Otoamne on the top side. Really good Kennen game from him, some really good ultimates, but just in general, he was incredibly fun to watch here. Kennen into Gwen can actually be a pretty interesting matchup for both sides. It really is one of the more intriguing top lane matchups, in my opinion, that we get pretty consistently in pro play, and I think Otoamne played it at a very high level. He's been very good across this entire split. He really has been pretty good over the course of this entire year. He's just kind of had some bad games here or there. It felt like he was entirely mentally tilted in the spring split, and it really wasn't working out in winter either, but he's probably been the most consistent player on Excel, even when they were losing. And so to see him continue to play well when this team has gotten better and when they are able to win games, it's really, really good to see just in general. Happy to see Odo continue to play well. But everybody on this team kind of pulled their weight. Patrick had a phenomenal week, as he has had a really good split, like a very underratedly great split. Limit had a very good week here playing the Milio. That seems like a champion that this team is going to prioritize incredibly highly once we get into more concrete games. He's been very good on it in the regular season. Peach was very good on the Sejuani, and Abadaga certainly played his role on the Cassante in the mid lane. Not a lot of LEC mid laners have been picking up on the Cassante. That's really been almost exclusively a top lane pick in the LEC, where it's been flexed into the mid lane in a lot of the other regions, but good to see Abadaga picking that up here for Excel. But in general, this team looked like a lot of fun in this game, and you've just got to be excited. They are going to end the regular season at 5-4. Obviously, that does confirm them for the group stage. They've been confirmed for the group stage, but they have the chance to finish in like the top 3, which is pretty insane considering this is the team that has finished 10th 2 splits in a row up until this point. And so probably the best outcome possible for Excel. They're going to finish their first split of 2023 with a positive record here. And then for Vitality, 1-8, man. I mean, what do you want me to say? This team completely collapsed. They couldn't even get the job done when the pressure was completely off of them. There was nothing to play for in this game, and yet they still picked an incredibly boring comp, and that's certainly got to be something. Done of the game for me is going to go to Kaiser in the support position. How are you going to be eliminated at 1-7 playing just for fun and for pride at this point, and then pick Yuumi? Like, come on, man. Like, you gotta do something else, and it wasn't even a particularly good Yuumi performance, and so Kaiser's gonna get done of the series. He's been, pretty bad, I would say, over the course of this year up until this point. Him and Upset, it just never felt like they clicked. Kaiser is someone who I think wants to get out on the map and play aggressive and move around and really try to create and make plays, and Upset really hasn't seemed to want to play that style up until this point. He's been mostly weak side for Vitality, and I think that's been relatively problematic for them. Perks got really nothing done here. He was trying to get out on the map, but mostly was just in losing skirmishes for this Vitality team. Douglas was actually relatively fine on the Viego, and Photon certainly was playing relatively fun on the Gwen until eventually he just gave up and decided to rage side lane for the rest of the game, which again, whatever, you're 1-8, like I get it, dude, he's mentally tilted out of his mind. Probably still shouldn't be doing that on stage, but it is what it is. But this team is just not very good. Their split is over, and, there's a chance that their season is over because of the way that they performed here. Now, they're still, right now, I believe, in 5th place in terms of championship points at the very minimum, and so it's technically possible for them to still make top 6. That's really all they need to hit, is top 6 in terms of championship points, and that's definitely still possible for them, depending on how things work out for them to get into the regional finals. But does anybody really want Vitality in the regional finals with how they're performing at the current moment? This team has taken, kind of the opposite approach of what we've been talking about in day 2, where they've taken the onus out of their hands. They no longer control their own destiny. They have to hope that the teams that are below them in the championship points do not overperform in the playoffs and end up getting into that regional qualifier. So Vitality split is over, and they deserve it. They played really, really poorly towards the back half of Summer Split. And then Excel is just good. Like, there really is nothing else to say. They're a good team. They're not a great team, in my opinion. They still have some pretty big weaknesses, but this is a team that I trust relatively consistently to be able to take down the mediocre teams in the league, which is just something that they have not been able to do. This is the Excel that we were promised, and I'm really glad we're finally getting it here this year. But now that we got that first one out of the way, it's time to jump into our next games, and pretty much all of them are going to have some implication on who ends up making it into group stage, and that kicks off here as we have a matchup between Team BDS and Mad Lions, and BDS is going to be able to pick up the win here. They're going to get to that magic 4th win, go 4-5, in the summer split and locked themselves in for the group stage. A pretty good win here, but Mad started 4-0. They have ended the split 0-5 in their last 5 games. That's about as disastrous as you could possibly end the split, and they've done it in games where they haven't been particularly close. Like, it's not like they're losing by, like, just a little bit. They're getting kind of blown out in a lot of these games, and it's certainly worth being concerned about, but we'll talk about them in a second. We got to talk about BDS first, because them picking up this win here is massive for them. Obviously, BDS did not think that they were going to be near the bottom of the standings when the split started. You know, obviously, the podcast tier list from Dracos and Kadril was just kind of troll in the first place. Nobody really believed that BDS was the only S-tier team in the LEC compared to everybody else, but, you know, they certainly have not lived up to those expectations. They've been very hit or miss over the course of this split. A lot of their players have not necessarily been as good as they have been in previous splits, and the consistency is definitely not there. But one player that you can say is definitely still stepping up is Adam in the top lane, who has continued to be fantastic for this team. He's made a really big case to be the most valuable player across the entire year of 2023. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be making that case yet, because I think there are a lot of good choices. There are a lot of players that have been really good for their teams, but to not consider Adam for that, I think would be a big travesty with just how good he has been in 2023. He's going to get my player of the game here on the Renekton. Was just able to do so much in the early laning phase. Chasey was miserable on the Kennen in this game, and a lot of that was because of just how much Adam was beating him in the laning phase. So big credit to him. He played fantastic, and he's been fantastic across this entire year. In almost every single, like, major win that this team has had, Adam has been the one stepping up. He's certainly been the one that's carried them in the regular season in particular, and I think a lot of that has to stand for something. I think he has been a huge positive for them, and his ability to turn his career back around from a player that was so hyped when he joined Fnatic to getting kicked off the team, you know, for a bunch of different reasons, going down to the ERLs, dominating the ERLs, and then coming back up here to the LEC and becoming one of, if not the best top laner in the LEC. It's just an impressive series of events, and you've got to give him a lot of credit for it. Everybody else was also good on BDS. Sheo was actually fantastic in this game on the Maokai. Full jungle control, just absolutely had every bit of the map covered and was really good at getting objectives and setting up the rest of his team. His scoreline honestly doesn't give him justice for just how good he was in this game. Nuke was doing a lot of damage on the Azir, one of his better games of the entire split. Crownie and Labrov were significantly more consistent in this one. Again, they didn't necessarily need to be the focal point, but they were good enough to be able to get them across the finish line. Just a lot of good stuff from BDS. Really not a lot of negatives to give this team, if I'm being honest. And then for Mad Lions on the other side, a lot of negatives to give this team, if I'm being honest. They're just not playing well. Nobody on this team is stepping up. Karzi's probably the closest you can get to somebody who's actually trying to play right now, but he picked Ezreal. I know he plays a lot of Ezreal, but that champion was literally doing negative damage this game. Tahm Kench, Maokai, Renekton just taking all the Qs and not taking any damage, and he was entirely useless, and the rest of this team has certainly not been in a position to be able to step up and win games. Obviously, they went under a pretty big, loss streak going into the best ofs last split as well, and they ended up winning the split. They ended up winning finals, so I don't want to count them out entirely, but man, I think you could argue that their form right now is worse. Losing 5 in a row is disastrous for this team. You could give dud of the game to a lot of people. I'm going to give it to Chasey on the Kennen. Like I said, Adam just completely outplayed him in this one, and Chasey's actually been really bad over the past, 0-5 games. As bad as Niski and Elyoya and Hilly have been, Chasey's right there with them. It's really just been Karzi that has been able to step up and be even remotely relevant, like not a problem for this team, and that's not necessarily a good sign. Niski's been one of the worst players in the LEC over the past 5 games. Elyoya really hasn't been able to create a lot, although I think he was kind of okay in this game, just not great on the bye, and Chasey and Hilly have been like int monsters over the past couple of games, and so I don't really know what you do to fix this if you're Mad Lions. I don't really know how you get past this hump, but you got to figure it out soon. This was the final game of the regular season. You are going to be in group stage because you did start the split 4-0, but you definitely need to figure things out, because if you continue playing at this level, it's going to be a pretty quick exit for you in the best of 3 stage. But for BDS, really nice win. Really happy to see this team kind of get back on the same page this week. They were significantly better this week than they had been in previous weeks. I think Adam stepping up was a big reason why. But if Crownie and Labrov don't get back on the train, if Sheo can't stay consistent, this team is still going to have some major problems. They're not just going to want to get top 8. This team wants to get top 4 at the very least. And obviously they're capable of doing that, but this wasn't exactly the best showing in the regular season to give me the confidence that they're definitely going to be able to do it. And then moving on to our third game of day number 3, and this is really one that's going to matter. 2 teams sitting at 3 wins. The winner's going to be locked, and the loser is going to be in a pretty rough spot. We've got Koi taking on Astralis. And Koi is going to be able to pick up the win. This puts Astralis in a very risky position, of course, with the rest of the day. There is a circumstance where they don't even get a chance for a tiebreaker to put themselves into the group stage. But for Koi, this is a massive win for them that they desperately needed. They very much needed to be able to come out on top in this one, and they were able to get it done. And again, very similar to a lot of the things that we've said about Koi over the course of this year. They're the most predictable team, or one of the most predictable teams that the LEC has. You know exactly whether or not they're going to win the game depending on who is going to be the one to push them across the finish line. Larson continues to be a really big positive for this team. He's going to get my player of the game. It is so different to see an actually good Nico in the LEC. This region just in particular has not been able to play this champion, and it's pretty insane. But Larson has finally been able to pick up an actually good game from start to finish. I'm not including you, Caps, because you had a good start, but not a finish on this champion that really, put you in a relatively good spot. So ups to Larson. He continues to be relatively consistent. Even if he wasn't great on day number 2, he more than made up for it by pushing them into the group stage with this day number 3 performance. And then you've also got Comp and ADVN performing really well in this game. And again, this goes back to a lot of the things that I've said about Koi over the past year, which is that when Comp and ADVN, or when Comp in particular plays well, this team is going to win. And Comp played well. He got a Sivir. This is a champion that obviously played incredibly well last year. It was very important to their title run, and then again to their Worlds run as well. And so for Comp to be able to get it here in a meta where, yes, she's not quite as strong, but she's definitely still playable, and be able to step up and do as well as he did on her, it's good stuff to see Comp playing well, to see ADVN playing well on the Lulu, probably his best game in a Koi uniform up until this point, just incredibly concise, very good in the laning phase to be able to establish pressure basically immediately for this incredibly difficult lane, and then, be able to translate that into keeping Comp alive and keeping Comp in a very good position throughout the rest of the game as well. Just good stuff from ADVN. Shigenda and Malrang were also good. Malrang's Vi engages were fantastic towards the back half of the game. Just good stuff from Koi. They basically won around the block here, and that's really what you wanted to see. It really shouldn't have ever been in doubt whether or not they were going to be able to win a game like this. Like, yes, Astralis is a decent team, but Koi on paper should just be better than them, and lucky for them in this game they were, and they are now going to qualify for the group stage. That should be the bare minimum for this roster, but it's good to see them be able to accomplish it. And then for Astralis on the other side, not good. This is not the situation you want to be in. You do not want to be sitting at 3 and 6 on this final day. Of course, every team left has the opportunity to get to 4 wins. That's not to say that all of them will. There definitely still is the possibility of, Astralis getting the chance to bail themselves out in a tiebreaker, but there is also the chance that they won't even ever get that opportunity. And so, gonna be interesting to see, but they kind of got blown out in this game. Dud of the game for me is again gonna go to Jonghoon in the support position. I really like him as a player, but this final week was really not it for him. This might be the single worst week that he's had in the LEC across his entire career here so far in 2 years. And that's really, this is not the time for that. This definitely was not the time for that. And Kabe, I think as well, has really kind of, lowered his game, I think, in recent weeks. Kabe was someone that everybody was super excited about, was definitely starting to get back into form here with Jonghoon on this Astralis team, but man, it just was not a very good final week for them, and I think it very much cost them. Leader very much had an opposite performance to what he had in day number 1 on the Azir, where it was like, oh, he can actually play this champion now. It's like, oh, dude, do you know the interactions? He kept trying to ult Vi away in the middle of her ult cast, which is not going to work. That's not how those interactions work, and you gotta know that, and clearly he didn't know that. 113 wasn't particularly good on the Viego. Finn had basically no impact on the Cassante. Nothing really worked for Astralis in this game, and it could cost them their season. Remember, if they're eliminated, if they don't make top 8, then they are officially the first team to be done. Like, they will not play another game for the rest of the year if they don't make it, and so their fate is very much in the hands of Fnatic at the end of the day, who is going to be playing SK, but for now, Astralis just has to hope and pray that Fnatic can keep things rolling and get it done and drop SK down. But for Koi, they're going to be locked in at 4 and 5. It's certainly not the record they were looking for, but being able to make the group stage is a good thing. This is a team that has made top 4 this year, and so, I wouldn't be surprised if they were able to go on some sort of run towards the back half of the year, but this team is definitely a little bit different. It feels like the mental surrounding this team isn't nearly as good, and so it'll be interesting to see, but for now, very, very cautious on Koi. And then moving on to our 4th game, this one with slightly less consequences as both teams had already qualified for the group stage. We had Team Heretics taking on G2 Esports. And G2 is going to pick up the win. They're going to move to 8 and 1 on the split, and at the very least, they're going to secure their spot as the number 1 seed coming out of the regular season, which is pretty damn good. Remember, they are guaranteed the number 1 seed because they've already beaten Fnatic this split, and so G2 doesn't actually have anything to worry about. Fnatic, the only team that can actually match records with them, and G2 would hold the tiebreaker. So really good stuff coming out from G2. It's just about exactly what you could have asked for. Going up against a Heretics team that is actually pretty good. Like, they are for real pretty good, and definitely fun to watch. And I definitely think that G2 showed up and said, you know what, screw it. Like, we're going to be able to win this game. Now let's get the elephant out of the room. The Cassiopeia bug, the 2-hour-long pause, only for 2 minutes of gameplay. All of it sucks, and it really hampered the viewing experience, I think, for a lot of people, but we're mostly going to talk about what happened before the bug, because I think that that's more relevant. There was really only a little bit of gameplay after the bug anyways, and so let's go ahead and talk about it, but it actually did have a pretty profound, I should say, impact on the game state. Heretics calling for that bug because of the Cassiopeia ult, ultimately kind of screwing them over, putting them in a pretty poor position where they actually were in a pretty good position before the chrono break, so certainly an intriguing thing going down there. But for G2, let's talk about it. Player of the game is going to go to Caps in the mid lane on this Cassiopeia. Obviously ended up being incredibly crucial towards the back half of this game, but he just pilots this champion incredibly well. Cassio can be a really dangerous champion to go into. I would consider it close to an LEC staple at this point, a champion that isn't really picked up all that much in other regions, but is seen a bit in terms of pocket picks with LEC mid laners, and I think most of the time they perform at a very high level with this champion. Cassio's very fun to watch at the pro level, in my opinion, and can deal a crazy amount of damage. Obviously, the ultimate can be fantastic, especially when it lands, or when it's supposed to land, or when it's not supposed to land, but I think Caps coming back online, getting back into form, I think is generally just a really good thing for G2, and I think it's a big reason why they're sitting at 8-1. Caps being significantly more consistent was a big thing that held them back in previous regular seasons. Not that Caps individually was holding them back, but rather I think, you know, their ability to limit test and try new strategies was kind of hindering their records, I think, in a lot of the regular seasons. That doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here. In summer, they definitely seem to want to win, and they definitely are winning. Everybody else on this team is doing well in that same vein. Mickey X continues to look great, this time on the Milio instead of the Braum. Han Sama looks good on the Aphelios, and honestly, Broken Blade looks fantastic on the Cassante. Really good game from him. Yike continuing to look good on the Trundle, which is very quickly becoming one of his higher played champions, which I just don't think a lot of people are talking about. But G2 looks really good. They're 8-1 for a reason, and even if they maybe had a chance to lose this game before the chrono break, it was super clean after, and so hard to give them a lot of flaws on this one. And then for Heretics, close game, but you just weren't able to get it done. Almost ended up losing to a backdoor anyways, and so definitely a frustrating situation there overall. But, you know, for Heretics, it's a tough week. It's a tough week in general. You had to play Mad Lions, who, you know, we thought was a pretty good team. Turns out they're actually not. And then G2 and Fnatic, the two best teams in the league. So certainly, at the very least, not an easy schedule. To be able to walk out of it 1-2, I really don't think is the worst case scenario. And you're going into the best of threes, you know, having just played the toughest competition that you've played all year long. And so you're practiced and you're ready, I think, to go into that. And you're going in at 5-4 in a relatively decent spot. And it could be worse. Dud of the game for me is going to go to Evie. Unfortunate for Evie that his one good play of the game ended up getting chrono broke away from him. A lot of jokes about it being a canon event that Evie has to underperform in big games, and so they had to take it away as soon as he started performing well in the Crocodile. But pretty poor game from him before that. Really bad early game coming in from him, and that's going to be pretty disastrous on the Renekton. You're really not going to be able to get away with that in a lot of different circumstances, but there were positives. I think VTO continues to look good on this kind of signature Kai'Sa mid pick that he continues to pull out. That champion's really strong and in a really good spot right now, and I think that Kai'Sa mid honestly has a lot of viability outside of just the players that play her well, and so it'll be interesting to see if people continue to pick her up. I think Yankos was fine on the Maokai. Couple of poor engages coming out from him, but he was fine. Flakked was doing a good amount of damage on the Zeri, and Mercy was fine on the Yuumi. Overall, Heretics was just a little bit outclassed by G2 towards the back half. If they were able to get that fight off, and if they were able to win near that Baron pit, they were honestly in a relatively good spot, but because of that chrono break, because of the way things ended up being reset, it just wasn't in the cards for them. So they're going to be moving into the best of threes at 5-4. Pretty decent. I still think that this team at the moment is a top 4 team in the LEC, and they probably should have expectations of getting into the top 4, of getting into the playoffs, but it'll be intriguing. This is really going to be their first major experience in best ofs, and so going to be interesting to see how some of these players end up lasting. But for G2, they look fantastic. They're the best team in the LEC, as I've said about 1 billion times on this channel up until this point, and I would expect that to continue through the group stage. This team doesn't have expectations of making the playoffs. This team has expectations of taking home the trophy. And that's going to bring us to our final game of the split here in the regular season in summer. And it really matters a lot. It will determine whether or not we get a tiebreaker for that final spot or not. We had SK Gaming taking on Fnatic. and SK is able to pick up the win. They're able to move to 4-5, and they are officially able to qualify for the group stage here in the summer split. This eliminates Astralis not only from the summer split, but officially from 2023. Their championship points are not high enough, and there's no opportunity for them to go higher, so they will not be making the regional qualifier. They will not be a top 6 team, which means that not only are they bottom 2, but they're done. Like, their 2023 is over. This team is finished, which is unfortunate for them, but they controlled their own destiny, and they weren't able to get the job done against Koi on the final day. They needed to be significantly better than what they were across this split, and it just wasn't able to be done. But congratulations to SK. I had counted them out, honestly. I thought that they were done. I thought there was no shot of them being able to make the top 8. I really thought this week was going to be too difficult for them. They had a relatively interesting schedule. Obviously, being able to take down Mad and Fnatic is a pretty damn good week for SK, and generally being able to sit at 4-5, I think has got to be an accomplishment for them, and I think a lot of it has to be put on their players stepping up when it mattered the most. Player of the game for me is going to go to Marcoon in the jungle. Obviously, I love Marcoon as a player. I've been really high on him ever since he joined Excel back in the day, and I really do think that he's only gotten better in terms of what he's been able to offer as an LEC jungler. He's someone who I think you could insert onto a top team, and he would look right at home, in my opinion, and I think he really did help out the team a lot. Finally, a Nautilus jungle that doesn't look bad. Now, that's not to say that all Nautilus jungles have been horrible. It's not like Scion jungler or anything for me, where I've yet to see anyone actually perform at a relatively decent level on that champion, but Nautilus is very difficult to play in the jungle role, and we've seen that. We've seen this champion be perma-useless in the jungle on players that aren't able to just kind of outplay their opponents, but Marcoon executed at a very high level, and it's very impressive to see that. Now, the rest of the team definitely still stepping up. Certus was still really good in this game on the Azir, another really good performance from him, even if Humanoid was also good on the other side of the map. Exakick had some good moments on the Jinx. Doss was really good on the Milio, and Irrelevant was solid on the Jax. Basically, everybody on SK needed to step up in this game, and they did. They're going against one of the tougher teams to beat in the entire league in Fnatic, who, yes, was trying some things out, but still was playing relatively strong, and SK, stared them down and were able to take them down, and so very impressive showing from them. They're going to be in that top 8. They're going to be in group stage, and it's going to be interesting to see if they can carry some of that momentum into some of those games. But for Fnatic, not really a consequential loss, if we're being honest. They couldn't do anything else. They were second place guaranteed after G2 ended up winning on the final day here. Even if they won and went 8-1, they would be second place because they did lose to G2. But, 7-2 is still not a bad record for what this team was able to do across this entire year. To be able to improve to that is solid. You would have just hoped to maybe close it out with a little bit of a better performance, maybe give us a tiebreaker. But dead of the game for me is going to go to Razork in the jungle. I've been praising him a ton over the course of this split, rightfully so. He's been phenomenal for Fnatic, but not so much in this game. The Maokai engages just really weren't all that efficient, especially towards the back half of the game. He was dying so quickly in these team fights to the ridiculous amount of damage that SK was able to put out that there really wasn't a lot that Fnatic were actually going to be able to do. It's not like, anybody else was really doing a ton in those team fights, although the Xerath pick coming out in the mid lane is certainly really, really fun. And I do think that it kind of worked. Like, the positives of Xerath, especially into the comp that SK ended up building, definitely showed itself, but it just wasn't going to be enough to push them across the finish line. Noah ended up over doubling his death total on the entire split in this game alone with 3 deaths. He only had 2 going into it, so unfortunate there. The infinite KDA or whatever, the 185 KDA or whatever he had going into the game. Not going to last throughout this one, but still a pretty decent performance, but ended up getting caught in side lanes maybe a little bit more than you would like. Trimby was fine. Oscar was fine. Really, this was just Fnatic not really having enough gas to be able to close it out towards the back half. I do think that their comp was a little bit interesting, and I think that the Xerath definitely, offered some things, but SK clearly had more of a point to prove, and so they were able to take a lot of these team fights, and you got to give them credit for that. Fnatic isn't really all that pressed, I think, about the loss, but SK's got to be incredibly excited. Their season is technically still alive, and now they have the opportunity to prove that they still belong somewhere near the conversation of top 4. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC Week 3 overview and analysis of all 15 games up on the screen. Now you're going to see the final standings for the LEC in the Summer Split regular season. Of course, bottom 2 teams have officially been eliminated, but we now know our, group stage teams, and we'll talk about the groups in just a second, but I do want to quickly go over my power rankings. Of course, up on the screen, you're going to see in the first column to the right my updated power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week, so we can go over the rise risers and the fallers. The biggest risers for me this week are kind of expected. I would say a lot of teams that are continuing to be positives, maybe some that aren't expected. G2 and Fnatic are going to stay 1 and 2. They're the 2 best teams in the league as far as I'm concerned, and it's pretty clear. But going up to number 3 is going to be Heretics, who I think, even though they lost the final 2 games, it was against the 2 best teams in the league, and they definitely held their own, especially in that final game against G2. And I think for me, they're just the most consistent team to put at number 3 right now. And then coming in at number 4, it's going to be Excel. They're going to jump all the way up to number 4. They were number 6, so that's 2 spots last week, and it really does feel like they're a top 4 team right now. I don't know if it's going to last, but at the current moment, they look really, really good. BDS is surprisingly going to stay at 5, and Mad dropping all the way to number 6 with a miserable end to the split. Now, this is a team that should be top 4, that should be able to figure things out, but right now they're just not. I'm not going to drop them lower than number 6 because I still have more faith in them than I do in teams like Koi and SK in being able to actually do something in best of 3s, but in their current form, they are worse. So gonna be intrigued to see what ends up happening there. Koi is gonna stay at 7, still really, I think that's like the exact same spot like that they're going to stay in basically the whole year. I just don't believe in them in the same way that I do anybody else in the top 6 at the current moment. They're a good team, but not a great team, and I think 7 pretty accurately describes that. And then SK barely scraping it in as the number 8 seed here in my power rankings. Making it into top 8 obviously is great, but still has a lot to prove. A couple of really good wins this week, though, that really keep them on my radar. If they continue to overperform, I'm not going to be entirely surprised, but it is good to see them in the top 8. And then, of course, Astralis and Vitality dropping down to 9 and 10, being the bottom 2 teams, and clearly being the bottom 2 teams, in my opinion, the 2 worst teams in the league. And so those are my power rankings. Of course, let me know who's too high and who's too low. And now we get to talk about player of the week and dud of the week. My player of the week, kind of a difficult choice. A couple of players that played really well this week for a lot of different teams, but my player of the week in week number 3 is going to go to Mickey X, the support for G2. I mean, he's just so good. G2 in general are just so good, and Mickey is a big reason why they are so consistently good. He's the best support in the West by a gigantic margin, and it's been really, really fun to watch. He could be a sneaky candidate for MVP, not only of the summer split, but of the entire year up until this point. So he's going to get my player of the week. Quite a few other candidates, players like Adam were definitely in the consideration. Noah was definitely in consideration, and so quite a few different candidates that I think definitely had to be on people's radar, but for me, it was a pretty easy choice to go with Mickey. And then my dud of the week in week number 3, this one was an even easier choice, is going to go to Niski, the mid laner for Mad Lions. He just had a miserable final week of the split. I think you could give this to basically anybody on Vitality as well, and I think that there are a lot of people that are going to be kind of in that conversation, wanting to give it to players like that, but for me, Niski was clearly the worst player in the LEC this week, and that's a problem. Mad Lions really needs to find their form, and they really need to figure out what they're doing, because right now they look like a team that really shouldn't be competing for top 4, and that's going to be a huge disappointment if they're not even able to make it out of groups after making back-to-back finals here at the beginning of the year. So my dud of the week in week 3 is going to go to Niski. My player of the week is going to go to Mickey X, but now I'm actually going to slightly veer off course, and I'm going to preview the groups at least a little bit. We've already talked about these teams so much, but I do want to give you guys my thoughts. So up on the screen now is the group stage. Of course, Group A is going to be consisting of G2, Team Heretics, Team BDS, and Koi. And Group B is going to be consisting of Fnatic, Excel, Mad Lions, and SK Gaming. And so let's go ahead and go over the teams that I expect to get out. In Group A, G2 is the obvious answer as the number 1 seed. They're clearly the best team right now. And then for me, Heretics should be the other team to be able to get out of this group with how they're playing. But BDS is not an easy out. Ironically enough, I think Koi is probably the worst team in this group, but they could still surprise some people, but I'm significantly less confident in their ability to win games in the best of 3 stage than I was at any point in winter or in spring. I think this is the weakest version of Koi in 2023, and I think that's going to be represented by them being last place in this group. But Heretics or BDS, that's really the question for the 2nd seed. I'm going to put my money on Heretics, but, if you want to take BDS, I totally understand if they can get their shit together. Adam and Crowny really can step up and be a very dangerous duo. But for Group B, kind of a similar story. It's one team that should be able to get out, and then 2 teams that are going to be fighting it out. Fnatic should be able to get out of this group at number 1. They should easily be the best team here. And then Excel and Mad, it is really an interesting conversation because, at the beginning of this split, you would have said Mad would take that no-brainer. It would not even really be a competition, but Excel has honestly just been better than them in recent weeks. And so kind of talking about who you want to take in that matchup, even SK, who looked good towards the back half of this week, I think definitely has an argument to be made. But for me, I'm going to take Mad Lions. I know that's kind of crazy, but I expect them to be able to get their form back in the best of threes. Excel, I think, will certainly make it interesting, and I think it will definitely be one of those two teams, but Mad either shows up and gets out of the group, or Mad doesn't show up, and I think Excel gets out of the group, and so going to be interesting to see how those things work out, but let me know down in the comment section below what you guys think is going to happen in the group stage, and of course, if you did enjoy the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people as well. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about the LEC every single week, and of course, we have next week off, but we'll be back with the group stage in a couple of weeks, and I'm very excited to cover that. But we don't only cover the LEC on this channel, we cover all 4 of the major regions, as well as the NACL every single week on this channel, so be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're interested in comprehensive overviews of every single LoL Esports league, and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.